So I want you to imagine for a second that you're wrapped up in the thickest, warmest, just heaviest blanket you can find on a freezing winter day.
Oh, that sounds amazing right now, honestly.
Right, it's incredibly comfortable. But this isn't an ordinary blanket. This blanket is the feeling of being completely, undeniably right about the world.
Ah, that is a very specific kind of warmth.
Exactly. And to make it even cozier, everyone sitting in the room with you is wrapped up in the exact same material. You're all just, constantly telling each other how fantastic you look, how warm you are, and how completely silly everyone outside in the cold must be.
Yeah, it's an intoxicating place to be. Super safe.
Very safe. But what happens if you decide to, I don't know, stand up, drop the blanket, and just walk out the door?
Okay, let's unpack this. We're doing a deep dive today into a deeply relevant piece from Psychology Today. It was published in April 2026 by Dr. Mark Horowitz, and it's titled, Going Post-Tribal is Lonely but Liberating.
Such a great title. It really is. And the core mission of our deep dive today is to explore why leaving that cozy, blanket-filled room of intellectual certainty is, well, biologically agonizing and socially isolating. Yet, ultimately, it's the only real path to profound wisdom.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that this isn't simply commentary on, like, the current state of our political discourse. I mean, it is that. But at its foundation, this is a meticulous exploration of human neurobiology.
Right.
It's about the hidden mechanics of how we actually process information, how we relate to one another, and the severe physiological toll of independent thought.
Yeah, which is huge.
Yeah.
But before we really get into the weeds of those mechanics, I do need to lay down a brief disclaimer for you all listening.
See, it's a good idea.
Yeah. So the source material we're analyzing today naturally touches on some highly polarized political figures and pretty emotionally charged social issues, specifically regarding race and public policy in America. So we need to be crystal clear. We are not taking any sides here, nor are we endorsing any of the viewpoints of the authors or the figures mentioned. Our job is simply to impartially report on the fascinating behavioral and psychological ideas contained within Dr. Horowitz's work and help you digest them.
It's a really important context to keep in mind because, to understand what it means to go post-tribal, we first have to understand the immense power of the tribe itself.
The default setting, right.
Exactly. Horowitz points out that our factory default setting isn't rational independence. It is fierce, uncompromising tribalism.
And he emphasizes that this isn't just a metaphor. Like, we are literally biologically wired for this.
We are.
So let's dig into that hardware for a second. How does a modern political disagreement actually trigger our ancient biology?
Well, it comes down to how our brains interpret threats. Like, for the vast majority of human evolutionary history, your physical survival depended entirely on remaining in good standing with your small group.
Right, because if you were alone, you were in trouble.
Oh, absolutely. If you were ostracized or cast out, you just wouldn't survive a harsh winter or predator attack.
Yeah.
Because of that, the human brain evolved to process social rejection through the exact same neural pathways that it processes physical pain.
Wait, really? The exact same pathways?
The very same ones.
Oh, wow. So when someone on your team, so to speak, calls you out for having a differing opinion, your brain doesn't just see a friendly debate, it sees a literal survival threat.
Precisely. Your amygdala sounds the alarm. And conversely, the brain heavily incentivizes conformity.
How so?
Well, when you receive in-group validation, or when you express a shared outrage with your peers, or when you feel that absolute unshakable moral certainty that your group is on the right side of history, your brain just floods your system with dopamine.
So it's like we're wearing team jerseys.
Yes, exactly like that.
We don't actually care if it was a good, fair game. We just want the dopamine hit of watching our team crush the other side.
Yep, it's a chemical reward.
But if we are biologically wired to crave this validation, does that mean our brains actually prefer belonging over the truth?
I mean, in an evolutionary sense, yes. The truth has frequently been secondary to group cohesion. Acknowledging a complex, nuanced reality is incredibly dangerous if that reality contradicts the core dogmas of your social circle.
Because then you might get kicked out of the circle.
Right. So your brain will instinctively deploy defensive mechanisms, like cognitive dissonance or confirmation bias, to shield you from information that threatens your belonging. It basically drugs you into compliance.
It drugs you, wow. Which makes the central premise of Horowitz's article so daunting. Because if our brains are actively drugging us to stay loyal, what happens when you cut off that dopamine supply? Like, what is the actual day-to-day experience of going post-tribal?
The immediate consequence is a stark, very quiet withdrawal. You lose that warm glow of moral
You
righteousness.
drop the blanket.
You drop the blanket. You forfeit those incredibly satisfying moments of camaraderie where everyone around you is just nodding in unison, celebrating how uniquely virtuous you all are.
Hmm.
And the tax you pay for abandoning that comfort is a profound sense of loneliness.
Yeah, the article really stresses that this loneliness isn't just about missing out on high fives at a party. It's a very specific kind of social isolation that stems from becoming unpredictable to the people around you.
Right, because human beings crave predictability in their peers. We rely on neat, easily categorized scripts.
So if you are deeply embedded in, say, a left-wing or a right-wing community, your peers expect your opinions on the economy, foreign policy, social issues. They expect all of that to form a predictable packaged set.
Exactly. And when you stop reflexively signaling your loyalty to that package, like, say you agree with the opposition on one specific point because you evaluated the idea on its own merit, you break the script.
And both sides start looking at you with suspicion.
Yes, you aren't just viewed as wrong anymore. You're viewed as untrustworthy.
Because they can't easily map your beliefs onto their survival framework anymore.
Right. And over time, this leads to a subtle but pervasive alienation. You aren't invited to the same conversational spaces, your opinions start eliciting awkward silences rather than easy applause, and you just find yourself standing outside that social warmth you used to enjoy.
But wait, let me play the devil's advocate here for a second. Is being post-tribal just a fancy way of saying you're a contrarian? Like, are you just flip-flopping your opinions to annoy both sides and feel intellectually superior? Because, I mean, nobody likes the person who just plays devil's advocate for the sake of their own ego.
That is a totally fair question, and it's a crucial distinction to make. Contrarianism is essentially just another flavor of tribalism.
How do you mean?
Well, a purely contrarian thinker is still entirely tethered to the tribe. They just define themselves by doing the exact opposite of whatever the mainstream group does. So their behavior is still completely dictated by the group's movement.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, post-tribalism, as Horowitz defines it, is a genuine refusal to reflexively signal loyalty to a political team. It's detaching the concept entirely from the identity of the person presenting it.
Okay, but honestly, that sounds intellectually exhausting.
It is.
If the biological penalty is a literal pain response from your amygdala, and the social penalty is persistent isolation, why on earth would anyone do it? What could possibly justify enduring that?
Well, the reward for enduring that friction is wisdom. When you manage to starve that tribal dopamine loop, you open up the capacity for a much deeper, more accurate understanding of the world.
The article points out that one of the first psychological shifts you notice is that flashy point-scoring debates just completely lose their appeal.
Right. You stop looking for that mic drop moment.
Right.
The urge to conquer or, humiliate the person you're arguing with just fades away.
And Horowitz uses a fantastic term for what replaces that urge. He calls it epistemic humility.
Yes, epistemic humility, meaning a deep, internalized recognition that your own knowledge is fundamentally limited and that your instincts might actually be wrong.
It's like taking off a pair of heavily tinted sunglasses, right?
Ooh, I like that.
Like the world isn't just pure red or pure blue anymore. It's infinitely more complex, which is scary, but it's real. So what does this all mean for how we handle people we fiercely disagree with?
Well, the less we depend on tribal kudos for our self-worth, the less incentive we have to demonize our intellectual adversaries. We obviously begin to crave constructive disagreement.
Because we don't have to dehumanize them to validate our own fortress anymore. They're just, other map makers with a different vantage point.
Exactly. You want someone to point out the flaws in your thinking, because that is the only mechanism by which your internal map of the world becomes sharper and more aligned with reality.
So to move from the abstract to the concrete here, Horowitz grounds this whole framework in some very real-world examples in the article. He looks at how two prominent figures approach public discourse regarding racial inequality.
Right. And just to remind the listener, keeping our mandate of impartiality in mind, we are looking strictly at the methods these figures use to communicate, as presented in the source text.
Yes, exactly. Purely looking at the methods. So the author first examines Ibram X. Kendi, particularly surrounding the rollout of his March 2026 book, Chain of Ideas, The Origins of Our Authoritarian Age.
Right. And Horowitz observes that during this period, Kendi's public conversations and interviews were conducted almost exclusively with sympathetic, aligned voices.
He was sitting down with supportive moderators, aligned scholars, people who broadly shared his foundational framework.
Yes. And the tone of these discussions was highly collaborative. It wasn't about stress testing the underlying premises of his work. It was about advancing a moral message collaboratively rather than exploring friction.
Which is a historically effective method for building a political movement, right? Like, if your goal is to consolidate a base and project a unified message, collaborative alignment makes total sense.
Absolutely. It's completely valid for movement building. However, Horowitz contrasts this approach with a different figure, Coleman Hughes.
Right, Coleman Hughes. He's described in the article as a heterodox podcaster. And just to define that for anyone listening, heterodox just means someone who breaks from orthodox or mainstream dogmas.
Exactly. Hughes openly opposes race-based reparations and advocates for colorblind public policies, which puts his policy stances in sharp contrast with Kendi's. But Horowitz holds Hughes up specifically as a model of the post-tribal method.
And the distinction lies entirely in how Hughes structures his intellectual environment, right?
Yes, rather than cultivating a space of sympathetic agreement, Hughes intentionally orchestrates what the author calls productive friction. He regularly invites dialogue from across the entire political spectrum.
Like, he'll host Noam Chomsky and Glenn Greenwald on the left.
And then he'll pivot to Neil Ferguson and Ben Shapiro on the right.
He's even publicly invited Kendi to join him for a conversation.
Right. He doesn't bring on jests to mock a straw man version of their beliefs. He brings them on to substantively engage with criticism and stress test his own ideas against their most formidable counterpoints.
The author argues that prioritizing this productive friction is really the best way to sharpen thinking on intractable problems.
It is.
But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is a massive pushback that Horowitz himself acknowledges in the text. Isn't this an abdication of principles at a certain point?
Hi.
The article explicitly mentions the classic Godwin's Law retort, like Godwin's Law being the internet rule that eventually any debate will lead to a comparison to the Nazis. People will ask, should people have been post-tribal in Weimar Germany? Should they have just calmly debated the Nazis instead of opposing them?
It is the most profound challenge to this entire philosophy. If you value intellectual friction above all else, do you risk losing your moral compass in the face of genuine malice?
Right. How does the article handle that?
Well, Horowitz addresses this by drawing on the philosophy of Max Weber, who is a foundational social theorist. And Weber makes this vital distinction between the realm of political action and the realm of intellectual pursuit.
Okay, so they operate under different rules.
Completely different. In his famous vocation lectures, Weber separates the ethics of conviction from the ethics of responsibility. Politics basically entails the ethics of conviction. It requires action, making definitive decisions, drawing hard lines.
So to be politically effective, you actually need a certain degree of tribalism.
Yes. But the intellectual's duty, the duty of the learner, the scholar, is fundamentally different. The intellectual's primary allegiance is to the truth alone.
Oh, that makes sense. So it's not about winning a campaign, it's about comprehending reality.
Exactly. For Weber, it is the highest duty of educators and intellectuals to actively pursue what he termed inconvenient facts.
I love that phrase so much. Inconvenient facts.
That's so good.
Those are the truths that actively unsettle our own tribal dogmas. The data points that poke holes in what our own team believes.
Right. If you only ever seek out facts that confirm what your tribe already thinks, Weber would argue you aren't functioning as an intellectual, you are functioning as a PR manager for a political faction.
Wow. And to really illustrate why those inconvenient facts are so necessary, the article brings up the classic parable of the blind men and the elephant.
Yes, a great analogy.
For anyone who hasn't heard it, a group of blind men encounter an elephant for the very first time. One reaches out, touches the trunk, and says, "Oh, an elephant is like a thick snake." Another touches the leg and says, "No, you're wrong, it's like a tree trunk." Another touches the side and argues, "You're both crazy, it's obviously a large wall."
And the profound lesson there is that every single one of those men is experiencing a true empirical reality. They aren't lying, but because they are inherently limited by their localized vantage point, their truth is dangerously incomplete.
And Horowitz connects this directly to our modern instincts. Every moral framework acts exactly like one of those blind men. Our specific ideological instincts might brilliantly illuminate one part of reality, but they completely blind us to the rest of the animal.
We each only grasp a portion of the whole.
Exactly. So I want you, listening right now, to think about how you consume information. Think about the articles you read this morning or the research you do for your job. Are you just looking for the trunk of the elephant because that's what your team believes in?
That's a tough question to ask yourself.
It really is. Like, how can you start actively looking for the inconvenient facts in your own life?
Well, doing so reinforces that there is always something valuable to learn from others, especially when their viewpoints sharply differ from or even unsettle our own. The person you fiercely disagree with might be touching a part of the elephant you didn't even know existed. And this raises an important question about how we define our own core values.
Yeah. If your core value is protecting your ego and your social standing, you'll stay in the blanket. But if you value a fuller understanding of the world, you have to endure the friction.
Exactly.
So, to summarize what we've covered today, we explored the stark neurobiological reality that our brains literally reward us with dopamine for tribalism.
Yep, the ancient hardware.
We unpacked the profound social loneliness, that unpredictability that hits you when you break away from groupthink. And ultimately, we looked at the liberation of epistemic humility and the absolute necessity of seeking out those inconvenient facts.
It's a difficult path, but it's the only reliable engine for genuine intellectual growth. And, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on what we've discussed about dopamine and loneliness.
Let's hear it.
If our biology punishes us with isolation for leaving the tribe, what if the ultimate hack is to build a new kind of community? Imagine if we could rewire our dopamine systems to reward ourselves not for being right, but for the thrill of discovering we were wrong.
Oh.
Right. Could we create a tribe of the post-tribal, united only by a shared commitment to the inconvenient truth?
That is an incredible concept. A tribe where the only jersey you wear is a question mark. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep drawing a better map and keep seeking out the whole elephant.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, the next time you feel that heavy, warm blanket of absolute moral certainty wrapping around your shoulders, it might just be time to drop the blanket and step outside into the cold. It's a little chilly out here, but the view is absolutely spectacular.